Okay, it's April 15th. We have a nice sunny day today. A few clouds in the distance, but none around the sun right now at all. I wanted to show you my at least temporary setup, my solar panels. I have 4 of them connected in series to the Ecoflow Delta Pro. Yes. I wanted to show you exactly what these panels are. So they are 250 watts each. And since there are 4 connected, that's a maximum of 1,000 watts. But I'll tell you, I rarely get 1,000 watts out of them. And when the sun is in the perfect position, I do get over 1,000 for short periods of time, about 1,100, between 1,000 and I've seen it go a little above 1,100. But I'll show you now the Ecoflow and how much power they're producing. Okay, this Delta Pro is powering my entire shop. So the lights are on now. I have a ceiling full of LED lights. I'm building a bench right now, and it's one of the reasons I wanted to bring you out here to show you the power tools that the Delta Pro can run. So I have, on a good sunny morning, I think it's 10:30 or 11 in the morning, those panels are producing over 700 watts. You can see the lights are drawing 170 watts. And I'm 92% on my battery capacity. So if I keep that configuration going, it will charge in 44 more minutes. But the solar panels will produce more as the day goes on. So what I have here is my box powering the entire shop. There's only 2 circuits, 2 20 amp breakers, and typically they were run by the underground power that comes from the house, 2 30 amp lines that I stepped down to 20 amps here. So this is 10 gauge wire, and each of the circuits I now have as plugins from the grid. And so I've wired this box with the inputs with plugins as well. So I can plug both circuits into the Delta Pro, the lights I have into the 20 amp circuit, and the outlets I have into the 30 amp circuit. But they're both breakered at 20 amps here. So then the output back here goes into the shop, and the outlets go to all of my outlets. I have outlets all over the place. Basically on every beam I have outlets. So this is my workbench area, so I'm going to have power everywhere that I need. Right now I have well, my shop vac plugged in, but I was using my chop saw quite a bit in this project here, and I was really impressed with the Delta Pro and how that it powered everything that I need. I use the chop saw, I use the table saw to rip 2x4s down into 2x2s, drawing a lot of power there. I use the router on the top here, rounding off the edges. I use the belt sander, the hand belt sander, quite a bit, and the Delta Pro ran it all. So I just wanted to give a demonstration, since I've got the shop vac already hooked up. Just fine. how many watts it's pulling. Now we're pulling over 1,300 watts altogether. Put the shop back on. And now I'll show you the chop saw. Runs that no problem. And the table saw, I guess I won't show you that right now, but it runs a table saw no problem. It's like the sun went behind a cloud. We went down to 200, and now we're back up to 400. 500 watts input. So we're still hooked up to the Delta Pro. That compressor is running. Okay, the air compressor just shut off. We're up to 120 pounds now. So it automatically shut off. The Delta Pro ran it all the way to maximum pressure. So let me tell you my experience with the Delta Pro. This shop has been running off-grid now for about 2 months. And it is basically run glitch-free. It does have its caveats. So I typically work late in the afternoon, 3, 4, 5 o'clock, and then I'll work until 7, 8, 9, even 10, 10:30. This project here I've been working till 10:30 at night, every night, well, for the past 4 nights. And so since I work in the late afternoon, the solar panels are not not producing a lot of power at that time. I have a big tree, so when the sun moves towards the west at about 5:30 in the afternoon, my power from the solar panels drops down to about 150 watts. And then as you get on to 6, 7 o'clock, it goes down to about 50 watts. So just with the lights alone, I'm drawing 170, and you can see that I'm using the battery from probably about 5:30, maybe 6 o'clock, until I'm done working. So running off of the battery, using the power tools and the lights that I use, and I have some outside lights, I usually turn them on. Also, there are LEDs. But and then I usually have another light or two on. These lights here, sometimes I'll turn them on depending on what I'm doing. But also usually this light over here. And so I could draw 200, 225 watts just in lights if I'm not using any power tools, just painting or whatever. And so the battery, I'm using the battery for several hours. And typically what happens is the battery will go down to about 50% plus or minus, usually maybe between 60 and 70% if I'm not doing much, and between 40 and 50% if I'm using a lot of power tools. And so what that means is then when I go to bed, and the sun comes up the next morning, the same thing, it comes up in the east, and the solar panels generate just hardly anything, 40, 50 watts. And then by about 8:30 in the morning, they're generating 150 if it's sunny, if it's not cloudy. If it's cloudy, at 8:30 to 9, they're still only generating 50 watts. And if it's sunny though, by noon to 1 o'clock, it's fully charged back up, if it's sunny. If it's partly sunny, it could take until 2 to 3 o'clock. And if it's cloudy without rain, it could take all day to fully charge, or it might only charge to 92-95%. If it's rainy, then the panels will only produce about 150 to 250 watts, and I might only get it charged up to 75-80% on a rainy day if the charge was down to 50% from the previous night. So if I'm going to be using this several days in a row and it's cloudy or raining all of those days, actually it was these past 4 days, I could run out of power. I never did, but potentially I could. And that's one reason I still have the option to plug back into grid anytime that I want. Or if I'm using a lot of power here, if I've got maybe a couple guys, which I don't usually do, I just work out here by myself. Anyway, I have the option of plugging back into the grid. The other thing that is noteworthy is that if it does drop below 32 degrees, so this shop is insulated, but it's not heated at this point anyway. And it gets, whatever the outside temperature gets, it'll get in here. So in where I live, it gets below 32 degrees on a regular basis in the winter. And this low temperature protection prevents the batteries from being charged. So I have this heater. It's just a jacket heater you plug into USB that I slide underneath here and just plug it right into its own USB. And also this wall is insulated, the back wall is insulated, and I have styrofoam insulation up here and underneath it. So I'm going to, before next winter, I'm going to have this little cavity insulated as best as I can. Plus, if I need more heaters than this, that doesn't produce a lot of heat. It doesn't draw much power either. But if I need to buy another one and put it on top, or even just a small heater, or even just a light bulb to put in there, then I'm confident that I can keep that little cavity warm enough. So then, now the other thing is, if there's no power being drawn, then you have to remember, I turn these lights off. Oops, left that one on. You have to remember that the inverter is still on. And if the inverter is on, even if there's no power being drawn, it is draining some power from the batteries. So if I turn all the shop lights off and I go to bed, and say my battery state is at 70%, when I wake up in the morning, I lose about 8% just by leaving this unit on, even though there's no power being drawn. Just the inverter alone and the electronics are drawing some power, which isn't usually an issue. 8% is really nothing. The solar will overcome and power that without any problems. So if I turn the inverter off, which is this button here, if I can find it, then, no, that's my motion sensing light. Here's the inverter button. If I turn the inverter off, then it doesn't drain any power, but my clock doesn't work, and my motion sensing lights don't work, and my outside lights don't work. So I prefer to leave that on. But that's just another thing to consider. If you do have some cloudy days all in a row and you're using power and your battery is getting really low, say you're down to 15%, and you know you're going to lose 8% just due to the inverter overnight, that may drop you below your 10% cutoff, which you can set your cutoff lower, but I think from the factory it comes with it at a 10%. So I have mine set at 10%. Won't use any power below a 10% charge. Anyway, just something to consider. Now in the summer it can get very hot here, so I'm not sure about how hot this corner would get. This is a south facing wall and does get very hot in summer to touch, and this is a west facing wall, and this one doesn't get as hot as the south, but it can get warm too, so this cavity may be a little furnace. So we'll see what happens with that. In that case, I could get a small fan and just set it on the shelf here and hopefully keep it cool enough to continue charging. Another thing I wanted to show you is this shelf that I built for it is pretty handy, I think, because I built it with the lower shelf there that extends out, so that if I do want or need to remove it, I can just slide it out here, and the rear wheels will be out on this little porch, and then I can pick it up, put it on my two-wheel cart, and cart it out anywhere I want. Plus it's insulated and such that I showed you before. If I ever want to get more batteries, I can put them down here, and my accessories and such I keep up here. Another feature of this Delta Pro is you can see the batteries are charged at 100%. My power draw is 160 to 70 watts, but the input from the solar has dropped from 800 watts down to 240. So I noticed that whatever my draw is, if I have enough power coming in from the solar panels, the input will increase and always be slightly more than the draw. So if I turn these lights on, my draw went from 170 to 200, and my input went from 240 to 270. And so whatever your draw is, your solar input will automatically match it and stay slightly ahead of it when you're at 100%. Another thing I love about this Delta Pro is this app. Because of the scenario that I have where this is running my shop, what I like is that I can turn that inverter on and off down here with this button down here, and so I can leave my outside shop lights on, and I can walk back up to the house at night, and then when I get in the house I can turn the whole inverter off. Or if I forget and I left a heater on or a fan on or something like that, hasn't happened, but if there was ever a time where I needed that I remembered that something was on, then I can just shut the whole system down and it won't use any power throughout the night. So you can see in a short amount of time we're pulling in over 800 watts now from the solar, and we're almost fully charged. Overall, I love this Delta Pro. I think there's a lot of different uses for it. In my scenario here, I really love it for being off-grid. It just gives me a good feeling that when I'm out here using lights and using power tools and running the radio and anything else that I'm doing out here, that it's essentially free. Yes, I know there's a cost of all this, but I feel like my power bill is not going up even though I run my lights for the whole time. So I just like the feeling of that. Not only that, but this is a power backup, because these grid lines go underground into my house, into my breaker box, and all I have to do is disconnect them from the breaker box, from the power, and those are dead wires. So if I were to connect these into here in a power outage, I would have underground power going right into my breaker box. And so since there's two circuits, I could put one circuit on whichever one that I wanted. If I wanted to turn off the breaker to the kitchen circuit and wire nut, or just hardwire, just unscrew the wire going to the kitchen circuit from the house circuit board and unscrew this wire from the circuit board. I would just wire nut those two together, and this Delta Pro would be hardwired into my kitchen circuit. So my refrigerator, my lights, my microwave, a heat plate that I would connect up would all be running off the Delta Pro in an emergency. And then another thing is I have a well pump, and my particular well pump is running on 110. So I have removed this, taken it to my well pump, and tried to run my well pump off of it, and it wouldn't run it at first until I ran the pressure all the way out of my pressure tank. And so the well pump motor was not running or starting under a load. Then the Delta Pro ran it fine. Ran it all the way up to 60 pounds pressure. I could run as much water as I wanted. It was only drawing 1,450 watts. So the Delta Pro ran the well pump just fine. So in an emergency, I have as much water as I need, as long as I take it out to the well pump and I fill up some 5-gallon buckets, or I fill up the bathtub, or I fill up some 1-gallon jugs for washing and drinking and cooking. And then I would either take it in the house and plug in my refrigerator in an emergency, or I would bring it back out here in the shop and hardwire it in to the house that way. So I have peace of mind that in a power outage, which my wife and I both experienced, 7 days without power when we were living in another state, but we did not have the Delta Pro, we did not have a generator, so we had to improvise in other ways. So now I feel good that this Delta Pro is powerful enough, the batteries last long enough to definitely bridge the gap in an emergency. Plus I've got those solar panels providing power from the sun. So overall, really happy with the Delta Pro. I plan to expand my use of it more and more in some of the ways that I talked about. I have 2 more panels. I have 6 total for 1,500 watts. But as you can see, those panels are just temporarily leaning against the shop there. I'm going to mount them either up on the roof or up higher on that wall facing south. So once I get more power coming in, then that will expand my options. Right now, the solar panels are generating way more electricity than what I use. Because like I said, I work 4, 5, 6 hours out here, 3, 4 days a week, and the rest of the time the solar panels just sit there soaking up power but not doing anything with it. And if I increase the solar panels by another 50%, then I'm going to have a lot of wasted power there. I'm trying to figure out what to do with it.